Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to go over what while loops are. So before I jump into any code, I'm going to go back to our text file and talk about what while loops are over here. So I've already given myself some space and while loops, here is the title. So I'm going to first go over the similarities and then the differences between while loops and if loops. So the similarities. So the similarity between an if and a while is that they both use uh, conditional statements. And so if we recall from our if loop lesson, conditional statements are anything that evaluate to Boolean expressions or Boolean values. So for example, one would be false and another one would be true. So basically they have to evaluate to true or false. Examples from last time: 2 is equal to 3. No, that's false. 7 is greater than 9 is greater than 7. Yes, that's true. But the differences between those two is that an if loop is basically to navigate code one way or another. So an if loop will never have both the if and the else uh, print statements or code run at the same time. That's just not ever going to happen. Whereas for a while, the whole point is to repeat some code. So it's gonna have something like while some conditional expression, uh, run this code, and then if suddenly that conditional statement becomes false, it's going to exit out of the loop. So I'm gonna go over here. I'm gonna write myself just a small while while loop. So while, and I'm gonna give it some easy conditional statement like 2 is equal to 2. If we remember equal from last time, and then I'm just going to have a print statement that says, okay, I knew that. And now I'm not going to run this code, and the reason being that this code is going to give me something that we call an infinite loop. So an infinite loop, if we look back over here, is, let's just think about it in what it means term by term. So while 2 is equal to 2, that's always going to be true, which is telling me, right, which Java is telling me right here, 2 is always equal to 2. And this condition is not being updated within the loop. Now, if 2 is always equal to 2, I'm always going to be running this code. And I'm just going to have this print statement print an infinite amount of time. So basically, until my computer goes bananas and it breaks, or the code just stops running on its own, telling me that it's gone way too far. So usually, while we're coding, we don't want an infinite loop. We want to have some code in here run, and then what we want to do is, have some code here, have some code here, maybe um, another loop, and you want to have the rest of the code run. If this whole time this infinite loop is just going to run, then that's not really taking my code or my idea anywhere else. So the way that we solve this is by setting up some kind of a count variable. So let's say I want to repeat this print statement 6 times, right? So the way that I can do that is by having it I can set up an int variable. So int count, just gonna name it pretty easy, memorable things. Int count is equal to 0. And you could set it equal to 6 and make it go up to 12 or something like that, but it doesn't really make sense. And I'm gonna have this thing right over here that says while count is less than 6. So this condition right here is, again, it's always true, and it's telling me, hey, you're not doing anything to count over here. Now that's where the magic of a while loop comes in. If I go down after this print statement and I just hit this, if I write count is equal to count plus 1, what it's going to do is it's going to automatically update the count. So the first time that we're running this loop over, it's going to say, okay, count is currently equal to 0. 0 plus 1 is 1, so count is now equal to 1. It's going to go over here. Hey, is 1 less than 6? Yes, it is. Run it all over again. 1 plus 1 is 2. 2 is less than 6. It's going to go all the way until we're going to get to 5. Right? It's going to run 5 times, and it's going to say it's going to run 6 times actually, because we have the 0th run, the 1st run, the 2nd run, all the way to the 5th run. 5 plus 1 is 6. Is 6 greater than 6? No. 6 is equal to 6. And that's why it's going to stop running at that point. And we're going to see, just to make sure that it does stop running, I'm going to have a print statement out here that basically says done or completed. And it's going to tell me that, hey, we're out of this while loop and your code ran correctly. So I'm going to run this code over here. It's building, and as long as I don't have an infinite loop, it's going to be fine. So here we are. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It ran 6 times, and then we have our little done message over here, which is basically telling me, hey, we ran this 6 times as we saw over here since we started with 0, and we exited the loop properly. Now let's see what happens if we set the count as equal to 1, right? In theory, we should only get 5, and we will get only 5 print statements. So that's why it's important to start at either 0 and then go to your desired value. Here we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or one way to fix this is, instead of just having it greater than or less than, you could have it with an equal to statement. Now if I have an equal to statement and I run it again, it should give me 6, because if we go back over here, we see that on the 5th run, it's going to come down here and it's going to say, okay, 5 plus 1 is 6. Is 6 greater than or equal to 6? Well, it still satisfies this condition. So it's going to run one more time. And it's going to stop at the 7th one. And here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's really like a preference thing at this point. You could start the count at 1 and have an equal to right here, or you could start it at 0 and get rid of this equal to and just do the loop like this. Both ways work. Personally, I start it with a 0 since that's what makes sense to me, and so that's just how you use a while loop. Now, one last trick that you can do over here is, if you're trying to increase anything by 1, instead of writing count is equal to count plus 1, one way to write that in a much easier and faster fashion is just writing count, which is the variable, and then just plus plus, and then hit it with a semicolon. And this basically does the same exact thing. It's just count is equal to count plus 1, just an easier method. And the same thing applies for subtraction, so I can have count minus minus. So let's try to run that over as well. Let's flip these numbers. So while count is equal to 6, and I'm gonna have while 0 is greater than count, and then flip this sign around. So while count, which is currently 6, is greater than 0, it's gonna run this code. And every time it runs through one time, every single time that it goes through, it's going to delete count by 1. So it's going to subtract 1 from count every single time. And this is just like a backwards way of doing it. But let's go ahead and run this code. And it builds. Bring this up here, and we see it ran 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times with our done message. And that's just a backwards way to do it. Personally, this is only useful when you're doing some very specific task. Let's say you're working with indexes or something else like that. Usually you just do the forward method. You start the count at 0 or 1 and you go up to your desired value. And that's it for while loops. Thank you.